Hey up and welcome to the Temple of Blair. I'm going to open this one with a short announcement. I heard a disembodied voice whisper my name in my kitchen the other day, and it's made me question whether I should stop asking people if they've seen a ghost. Not fucking about, deadly serious. It happened. Anyway, this is a conversation with Marcus Turner. Marcus has been the head of business affairs for Case Vessels for a number of years now, from the early 90s up until today. So this is a great conversation, as you might imagine, because when you try and crack some of these Roadrunner nuts, you have to sort of pierce the outer layers before we get into kind of the substance about what I like to talk about: business, infrastructure, relationships with bands and brands, and all these things. Marcus is a readily peeled onion. It's an analogy I'm sticking with, and as such, we have the unique ability to bounce around the place because we're already in the territories I want to explore. Anyway, enjoy this. It's a very unique perspective on the business side of Roadrunner Records. 1, 2, fuck shit up. So I don't know how you come into Case's life or into Roadrunner's life. Can you talk me through that? Because what Mike Varney said last week was he always took the piss you always took the piss out of him because you always looked so young, and it was so out of place that Mike thought that you were an imposter in like a meeting or something like that.
It's a bit like that. I remember meetings with our licensees in Southeast Asia. There'd always be droves of representatives from our label in Malaysia or Hong Kong or Singapore and so on. And their first question was always, how old are you? I mean, I don't look young anymore, but I did then. And maybe I was younger than the other guys. And certainly younger than Mike. I don't know how old Mike is now, but I think I probably, I don't know, God knows. I mean, I was young when I started. I was 23 when I just qualified as a barrister in London and had absolutely no work. It was the worst time to qualify. Besides, I'd lived in Holland for some time before that, which is why I was already bilingual. One of the reasons why I was interesting to Case when we finally met. But then living in London, trying to make a living at the London bar, and it just wasn't happening. Then out of the blue, my dad, who was living in Holland at the time, said there was this job advertised in the local Dutch or the Amsterdam newspaper for a junior lawyer at a record company that I've never heard about. And I've written the application for you because you need work. I was like, you what? You don't know? Fathers don't write applications. I'm 22, Dad. You don't need to do this. So I completely forgot about it. And a few days later, I think it was my birthday. I was living in Fulham at the time, and the phone rings, and it was loud in my room. There were people there, and I hear this voice saying, "Hey, this is it's Cees Wessels." You know, it's the Case Cees thing, right? It depends on where he is, whether he calls himself Cees or Case. There's a theory as to why he calls himself, or he pronounces it Cees. We'll get onto that another time. Sure. Says, yeah, I got your application, and I'm going to be in London in a few days' time. Can we meet? And I thought, who is this guy? I have no idea what he's talking about. And then, luckily, the penny dropped during this conversation, which was short. Conversations with Case are often quite short, and or they were at the time. I thought, this is the guy that my dad, it's the job application that my dad wrote for. I'm obviously getting an interview. So we set this interview up in the London office, which was on Walpole Way at the time. I don't know if that address rings a bell, but so a few days later I was there. I'd expected something more pristine than what it was, but it was just a house along the road with, I think Mark Palmer had long hair. There were all these metal heads. I had no idea what I was walking into, no idea whatsoever. Then I walk into the room in this case there. He says, yeah, I got your application, and this is what we're looking for. And then he goes through about 5 questions. Have you heard of a band called Sepultura? No, I haven't. Do you know anything about contracts? Not terribly much. I've done a few divorce contracts and a few rental agreements and bits of this and that during my pupillage. Do you know anything about record contracts? No, not a thing. Would you be prepared to move to Amsterdam? Hell yeah. And then a few other questions. And after about 15 minutes, he said, well, if you want to jump on the first flight to Amsterdam, you've got the job. And, if you think about interviews these days, if you want to get a job at Amazon, you probably have to go through about 9 levels of interviews, psychological tests, intelligence. all that business, right? And with Case, it was a 15-minute sit down, and he just went on a kind of like a gut thing, even though I had no particular qualifications for the job. And I was in.
Wow.
And then there was very short salary negotiation, in which I said I wanted this, and he said you're getting that, and I said I really want this, and we settled on that. That was the flight to Amsterdam. He paid 150 quid to move me over. But I didn't give a damn, because it was an opportunity to work for this record label, and it sounded really hot, and I thought, give it a go.
Yeah. Hey, good innings. It seems like the gut. I mean, you'll be in a position to comment on this, but Case's idea of management by gut feeling is something that carried through the duration, right? I think a lot of those kind of conversations, 15 minutes, just getting to feeling someone out is more the agenda than, as you say, having a prescriptive job description and do you match these criteria. He just gets a good feel for people, doesn't he?
Yeah, and I think that was his power, his strength throughout his the Roadrunner kind of history, was putting the right people in the right places, and that didn't need to. He didn't need to have had a long relationship with the person beforehand. In some cases, he did, and he brought those people in, like Costa Fraser and others in after him. But quite often, it was exactly as you say: sit down with someone, get a good vibe, gut feeling, and you're the man for the job, and now go make it happen. But you could be just as quickly out if it didn't happen. I mean, you could. There are football managers who have lasted longer or shorter than some of Case's managers. It was a bit like that. It was sort of like revolving doors with the guys that didn't deliver quick. You were never given much of a honeymoon. I mean, in my case, I came in and I'd signed a 1-year contract with a 2-month probation. And on day one, he pretty much lands a pile this high of contracts on my desk and says, I need those summarized. So I just started reading these things, and I had no clue what we're talking about. And every time I'd fire a question off the Case, he'd say, don't ask me, call Jules. So he had little patience, and there wasn't going to be any kind of induction to the job. And you just had to make it happen. You had to find your own way, sink or swim. And at the end of the 2-month probation, he said to me, look, it's not really where it needs to be in terms of what I expected. So either we part ways now, or we reduce your employment contract by 6 months. What do you want? I was like, that's a great dilemma to put me in. I tell you what, I'll go for the 6-month option, because I don't fancy going back to the UK. We'll make this happen. And in all fairness, after the 6 months were up, he said, this is where I wanted it to be at, and there's a pay rise to go with it. So he was very much like that. Come in, do the business, and I'll reward you if you do what I expect you to do. But if it doesn't happen in that short period, you're out.
Yeah.
It sounds harsh, but that's kind of how it was. But the other thing with Case is he's extremely loyal to those who work hard for him and deliver on what he and the label needed at the time.
Just to kind of speak to that mentality, the more I hear about Case's communication, he isn't communicating on behalf of Case Vessels. He's communicating on behalf of a corporate entity. And a corporate entity needs to be kind of agnostic in the way it deals with itself. And it's up to the person on the other side of the table to take that personally or not. And I guess it's all part of that judge of character, isn't it, really? But you say we come in and you've got a probationary period, you're immediately sent to Jules. Is this how the dynamic's happening? Is Jules still a head honcho at that point?
But Jules is in charge. Look, I mean, Jules had worked for Case really for about 5, maybe 10 years, probably 5 before I came along. And he was wasn't working in-house. He had his own firm, the law offices of Jules Kurtz. But he did all of Case's contracts in America and outside. But it became too unwieldy at some point. Case needed a man on the European side. But because Case didn't want to get into the nitty-gritty of explaining how contracts worked, and you didn't have any time or patience necessary for that. It was go to Jules, he would explain to you what cross collateralization means, or pipeline monies, or recoupment, and all that. Those terms that are, way out there for anyone coming into business. So he was. I suppose I reported to Case. He was my boss, but there was a kind of like dotted line to Jules,
Right.
and Jules was kind of like coaching me through this process. And Jules had all the time and patience in the world. Well, he was billing as well, but I think for the first year, I mean, so the story goes, Jules didn't charge Case anything. She's like, I'm going to do this because we've worked together and I believe in your label and we're friends and I'll help you on your way. So for the first year in America, Jules did all this work and didn't charge him a dime.
Right. Okay. Let's unpack that, because there's a big blind spot as to how the US works prior to The Office being there. Prior to, say, Doug and Monty and Steve Ricardo and all that gang being there in New York on Lafayette, everything behind that is kind of a blind spot. And I'm slowly, because I did the video, the 1982-86 video, and obviously as things, I'm governed by Sod's Law, which means as soon as I spend 6 weeks cranking that out, then all the information floods in that I could have used 6 weeks prior. I know Case and Jules worked together in the dealings with Polygram.
When they were working in Polygram, you mean?
Sorry?
When they were working in Polygram, you mean?
I don't know. This is the question. So I know Case worked at Polygram. Was Jules at Polygram, or was Jules contracting for Polygram as part of Jules' law firm?
Yeah, I'm not. Case and Coase worked together at I think it was RCA. And Jules.
Who?
Coase de Fraser.
That's how you pronounce it. Nice.
Coase, yeah. It's not Coase
de Vries.
Coase de Fraser. Coase de Vries. Yeah. So there was a connection there between Case, Coase, and Jules. Jules was the head of business affairs of the label that they were both working, or three of them working for at the time. Mm-hmm. Subsequently, Jules went and started his own firm. Because I remember Coase having loads of anecdotes about Jules as well, and that was all pre-Roadrunner.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like a triangle happening before the label started.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when the label did start, Jules said, "Look, I'll help you get going."
Because if Mike Vann is to be believed, the American connection with Roadrunner does start 82 with Merciful Fate. Case rang Mike Varney and said, I've got this EP, Nuns Have No Fun, and I'm looking for a licensing opportunity or something like that. And Mike was he wasn't quite at that point yet, I don't think. And so turned Case down, and then obviously 3 years later, they had quite a flourishing relationship, did Roadrunner and Shrapnel. But Jules was the man on the ground when it came to the US repertoire up until the office was opened, which is how Carnivore happened and how Whiplash happened. So and also what hasn't been said yet is Jules' reputation outside of Roadrunner and outside of Polygram, which is, I believe he was Ozzy's lawyer. I believe he was basically, if you think about the 80s metal scene and the excesses and all the cool rock and roll stories, Jules is somewhere over here in the background for them all. Is that that's my understanding? Is that about right?
Yeah, he was. He's certainly one of the forerunners in the whole legal rock representation business. I think one of the times we spoke earlier, he told me that he was Grace Jones's attorney or manager at some point. So he said to me, Marcus, do you remember when Grace Jones was doing great and she was in the Bond movie and she was selling records? So yeah, I remember that, Jules, but that's when I was her manager. You remember when she was nothing, everybody forgotten about her? Yeah, I kind of remember that as well. That's after she fired me. That's kind of how Jules' reputation. I mean, representing Grace Jones, that's Premier League, right? I mean, so he was my mentor, and it was great to be learning from a guy like that. About 6 months, maybe a year into my tenure, Case brought in another attorney called Glenn Davis to work in-house in the Amsterdam office. So Glenn had been a Sepultura's lawyer and was a very skilled attorney. So skilled that Case thought, I need him to not be representing Sepultura any longer because he's a tough negotiator and a ball breaker, I needed to be working for me. So we brought in Glenn Davis, who was really became my mentor. So this is about 9 months into my job, because I was, seriously junior, 23 in this the big man league, and I certainly needed a little bit of kneading here and there. So Glenn comes into the Amsterdam office, and we worked the business affairs department together. Me largely reporting to him. Soon after that, Coaster Fraser was brought in as well to bring a lot more structure to the label. This is around the time that KSAD was mega successful. So we were selling 1 million records. There was money pouring into the company. We were signing bigger acts. The budgets were getting bigger. The tour support was getting bigger. The videos were getting bigger. We needed more structure, and Coast was brought in at that point.
Right. What's his title coming in? Is it business affairs?
You mean Coast?
Yes.
No, I think he came in as managing director.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Director Roadrunner.
It's not often reported. I couldn't see it. I know there's a lot of, like, when I read my billboards and things like that, and radio and records, it's usually like a little snippet on the side that says Coaster Phrase has joined Roadrunner to help run the company. And it's like, right, yeah. Well, that's not very helpful, but you've just contextualized that quite nicely for me.
No, he was the MD, and he wasn't with the company for very long. I think it lasted about a year, maybe a year and a half. But he brought so many kind of structural, organizational, administrative changes to the company. It was a hell of an achievement to go from this independent that was doing okay with a certain income base to this independent with a massive income base, and we had to get organized, otherwise we were just going to like drown in the success. And in that year, he brought structure. He brought in a CFO from who'd been our accountant in America, Ian Flint, a very talented accountant who'd worked out as the outside auditor for probably not long after Case set up, 5-6 years, and then he was brought into the Amsterdam office as well. So now we've got Case, creative A&R, we've got Koos, the managing director, structure and sort of organizational, the whole setting up the corporate side, and with Ian Flint setting up the sort of fiscal structures of the company going forward as we became bigger and bigger. Meanwhile, Jules was still in America, doing his thing, although the American outfit was getting so sizable in the early 90s as well. We had to bring in the business affairs there too.
Yeah. Okay.
And Jules's role became sort of more and more reduced in effect.
Right. Okay. So this is the time when between KRCD and Typo. Yeah. Obviously that's the year. It's 1993, Bloody Kisses and KRCD. Yeah. Well, obviously Typo is the one that is elected to be the gold record.
Right.
Is there any, I remember who I've spoken to on this. I've spoken to a few people on, the Typo campaign. This is the threshold moment, as you said, when it becomes almost unsustainable in terms of how the label would manage itself. Therefore, and you've kind of answered my question there in terms of structure being built in to manage the uplift in revenue, business, correspondence, and presence, and all these wonderful things. Was it Case's ambition to have a gold record as almost like a menu item? As in, he came into the office one day and it was like, now's the time, lads. Let's mobilize and get the gold record. Jim Sowerby, Doug, Monty, give me a list of like viable artists for this to happen, and we'll push it with IRD, and we'll push it with sales, and we'll push it with Mark Abramson in the promotional capacity.
Yeah, look, I think that's really how it went. Guys, let's look at the roster and which one of these albums can go gold or better. And the spotlight came on Typo. And then I remember one of the interviews with Stefan Kuster, him saying, he remembers how Case would rally the troops. That's absolutely true. He would go, this is going to be gold, come hell or high water. We're going to make it. And everybody just instantly embraced that view and that plan and that dream. And it just, well, it didn't just happen, but it happened in that record. And because we were such a small outfit, there were maybe 80 or 100 of us at the time. It was just a massive, massive achievement to have taken that record and become so successful. And every room we went to in whichever of the labels or countries, that record was just blasting out all the time. It's one of the few records I probably know all the lyrics on, because it was just non-stop on. And so everyone in the company just were working their guts out to make that happen. It was brilliant, brilliant. But it started with Case going, okay, which one of these can break, and then let's go for it.
Was that, do you think, informed by KRCD in any way? Because I know he was so confident in KRCD being a success that there was a party at a castle in Wales.
Yeah.
So did you think, all right, we've identified a product which is going to be successful, and it was successful. So we're clearly getting the A&R arm of the company is no longer as much of a gamble as it used to be. Because like in the early 80s, it's not like Case would sign anything. There had to be some sort of repertoire in the band, but it was like 20 acts a year, let's say. I don't know if it was that. I think it was between 1984 and 1986. There was about 20, 25 direct signing records, all of which were kind of gambles because you didn't quite know how they were going to go. But KRCD is probably the clearest example of Case going, right, this is going to be massive. Let's throw a massive party in Wales and let's have like make it a big deal. And it was correctly a big deal. Do you think that might have informed the decision to just go, now is the time?
Yeah, because he was getting, certainly, he was also getting more expertise on the different departments, be it radio, sales, marketing. You bring those minds together, and if the sales guy is going, I know I can sell X thousand records, and the radio guy is going, I know I can get it on these stations, and the marketing guy is going, I know I can do whatever. And you've got the international rollout as well, where you've got the guy in Germany saying, I can, get these guys on the road, and it all comes together. If all these disciplines, like in the case of Typo, or after the success of KOCD, as you say, come together and go, yeah, this is another one of those records that we can do the same on as that. Then you have a platform, a basis, which almost becomes like I wouldn't call it scientific, but there's kind of like a knowledge basis that determines those choices. You can't do that with every record, but with some records, when all the departments have the belief, then it's more likely to happen. And after KRCD, look, Case had also, he worked in the major label system, so he knew how to break records. He'd been around people who were breaking pop records, rock records, on several occasions. So it's not like it was a mystery to him how to break a record. Mm-hmm. KOCD just brought more talent to the company on those different departments. And those guys working together were able to create bigger records.
Mm. And it's a matter of credibility as well. That's one of the bottom lines, isn't it? That's what the gold record brought. And I guess that's what KOCD brought. Did you go to the party in Wales?
No, I think that was, it's probably about 2 weeks after I joined the company, or 2 weeks before. I just missed it. They weren't going to take the rookie out there anyway. So I heard about it, but no, I wasn't there. I remember, but my first day at the office, September 8th, 1993, Sepultura were in town. I mean, just an amazing fortuitous. So Frank Strobler, whose name you've no doubt heard, and maybe you've spoken to Frank.
Not yet.
Says, hey, Marcus, it's a great day to start because Sepultura's in town tonight. And I was like, hang on, that's that band where Case asked me, have you ever heard of them? You really need to go to the show. And of course, I did. And before Sepultura, I'd never been to a rock show in my life. So I go to this rock show, and the first band, I can't remember their names, but they stood there in their DMs and in the noddy, and their guitars in front of their, private parts. And I thought, what the fuck is this all about? And this is the support act before Sepultura came on. And when they came on, this unbelievable wall of sound hit me for six, and I thought, this is now the business I work in. I fucking love it. So no, I wasn't at the castle, but I was at the Amsterdam show in '93 at the Paradiso.
I even emailed the castle and said, is there anyone there who was working there at the time? Because it must be somewhat unorthodox, especially for a Welsh heritage site, to be hosting that kind of thing. But I'll uncover more, I'm sure. So
Yeah.
as your role matures, let's say we're into sort of like 95 and we're seeing an expansion and a new infrastructure being rolled out to accommodate this new world that Roadrunner has entered into. How's your day-to-day been affected? Have you got now, because in business affairs, in a junior lawyer capacity, I imagine you're interfacing with band managers and trying to get them over the line into the company, getting projects rolling and things like that. Now that we've got repertoire and we've got a gold record, do you have any cocky buggers coming in saying, oh, I know you guys, Roadrunner, you've got coffers out of the wazoo. Let's sign a $1 million deal.
Yeah, well, look, Glenn Davis, back to Glenn, stayed with the company for a year. This is not a sort of it's starting to sound like everyone that came in around my time stayed for a year. Coast Glenn, but Glenn wanted to go back to LA, Amsterdam. I don't know, maybe it didn't suit him entirely. But I sucked all the knowledge that I could out of Glenn in that year. And after he left, I was sort of, it was no longer sink or swim. I mean, I sort of knew what I was doing, largely speaking. I was pushed more to the fore by Case in doing deals. Although by then we had business affairs in America, so I was more European, so doing the European deals, the Amsterdam A&R, the Amsterdam recording contracts, the French contracts, the UK, and so on and so forth. Working with outside lawyers in those different territories, all the international licensing, all the international distribution fell under my sort of remit. And I don't know if that answers your question.
No, totally. Who was the toughest one to work with in terms of in terms of an act that you're trying to get over the line?
Whoa. Damn, I don't know. Some of the Dutch acts were not that easy to work with. I mean, you know about our Buddhist sort of like adventure.
Yeah.
Trying to bring a bunch of pop artists into the Roadrunner stall was a bit of a challenge. I don't know if the last time we spoke, we had this company called the All Blacks, and that was the rights company, the All Blacks BV. Called because Case was a rugby fan after his period, 2 years living in New Zealand, and one of the negotiations with one of the Dutch pop artists almost went awry when he said, "I'm not signing a deal with a racist company." So, I don't get it. What's the point you're making? He says, "Well, your company's called All the Blacks. I'm not signing with those guys." So after explaining to him that we hadn't called the company for any other reason than a national rugby team, it was a little easier. But yeah, some of the I don't know. I can't pinpoint one particular act that was very difficult to work with. Look, they were all difficult to get on board. There was of course the enthusiasm to sign a deal with Roadrunner, but at the same time, our contracts were tough as hell. You've heard before, we had 5-6 album deals. The options were on our side. The recording costs were relatively low. They grew over time, but they weren't sort of amounts of money that you could retire on. We didn't pay the artists huge personal advances, so they had to sort of make the record and survive until they hit the road, on tour. So getting out, and we were tough. If an artist wanted a different kind of packaging outside our standards, we'd make them pay for it. I don't know if all these things should go down in the documentary, but we had really tough contracts.
I think it is important, though. I think it is because the question that needs answering, and this is one that I don't think you can answer it. I don't think Cage can answer it. I don't think Monty or anyone can answer it. Is did they put up with that because Roadrunner could do something with a certain kind of band that no one else could do? So you quite happily sign over, the 7-album deal and the option in the publishing and all that stuff. We're happy to do that because it gave you a much more viable chance as a band than if you'd go to say another metal indie.
Yeah,
that's the reputation at this point.
But we invested more heavily than other rock indies. I'm sure about that. I mean, the case was the first one to say we need a better video. It's got to be more quality. We put the band on the road. Pay $100,000 for them to go and tour the world. I mean, this is recoupable tour support, but we were investing more money in bands than anybody else was, I think, at the time, outside of kind of like the major scene, but they weren't signing the kind of bands that we were signing. So yeah, we had top contracts, and I think you're right. They signed with us because the chance of them gaining some level of success, also with the team that was behind it all, was higher than the alternatives at the time, who might have been doing a record with them, but didn't have the merchandising wing, didn't have the publishing wing to kind of like give the whole platform from which a success could follow.
I think it's worth understanding a cash flow situation from Roadrunner as an infrastructure as well, because let's say you've got 5 bands and they've done the first album, it's $5,000 to record it, and they get dropped, and they're thinking, oh right, Roadrunner are cheaper, they didn't push us or something like that. I think it's worth understanding, and this could be this is a perception I've got. It's not necessarily true, but if you're, say, in your position or in Case's position, it's okay, well, we've got this band that we've recouped $5,000 from, or not recouped it yet, who aren't going to generate enough revenue to make it worth our while to continue this relationship. So I can either drop them, or I could drop Marcus, or I could drop Monty, or I could drop Kos, or I could drop these guys who are on a salaried position, but are also spinning 10 other bands that might make the 5,000 back. So I think it's worth shining a light on what's happening in the company as well. Because a lot of the time the perception is the record label is fat man, cigar, desk. That's the dynamic, and it's not quite that simple. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I'm unpacking these things as I have these interviews.
It definitely makes sense. Look, I think we were the only indie at the time, I'm talking mid-90s, who had offices in 7, 8 major territories. And we were where we were in Germany, we were in the UK, we were in Japan. Who had a label in Japan at the time? We were obviously in America, Canada. We had strong relationships with parties. We had an office in Brazil at some point. Strong relationships with our distribution partners. Some of them were joint ventures. So you signed a record not only to Roadrunner in America, but you largely knew that your record was going to be distributed all over the world, mainly by Roadrunner companies and a Roadrunner team in the major territories. That was to use, for lack of a better term, a unique selling point at the time. Next to that, we had these great partners in the sort of secondary territory. Like we were strong in Poland, and we were strong in other distribution territories that could well have become Roadrunner territories with their own office at some point in time. It might, it didn't happen in some territories, but I think that was the investment the Case was making over and above what other people were doing at the time as well. And it was a brave thing to do. Opening an office in Japan costs a hell of a lot of money to not just to get structured together, but you have people on the ground. Case was flying out there once a month or whatever it was at the time. We were having local investments in marketing. That was happening in 8, 9 countries all over the world. And he was putting the best rock people in place. That's what you signed when you signed a Roadrunner deal. So with all and back to your earlier question, with all the kind of, call it negatives of a ball breaker deal that you're signing, you were getting all those benefits, or potentially those benefits, by signing with us.
That's almost the soundbite, isn't it? Yeah, you got $5,000 isn't a lot, but $500,000 went into all these territories and hiring the staff so that you'd have a network and a presence in all these territories.
Yeah, and
that's really it.
I mean, we weren't. The company wasn't that profitable until sort of post KOCD. And Case set up the company I think he registered the company in 1978, started proper in 1980, was investing. It wasn't lucrative for a good 10 years or more afterwards. I mean, he remortgaged his house, and he really dug deep. He was turning over all his pockets just to make this work. I think I don't know how he managed to remortgage. I mean, I try and remortgage your house. Go and tell your wife, I'm starting a business. We're going to have to sell the house and move it to something smaller because I believe in this so strongly. So for years and years and years, he just invested and he dug deep. And the returns started to come after 93, but he wasn't there yet because 93, 94, 95, they were relatively good years, certainly the KSOD year. And then America was happening, but the overhead was growing as well. So you don't just have a gold record and then you're profitable. No, those two things are in balance. We had a number of lean years as well. I mean, I remember times when I think it was even in the Costa Fraser period. It's like, guys, we're not going out for dinner anymore unless you're invited. We've got to be tight on expenses. We really, I think we might have even been behind the term lean and mean. That's exactly how we were. The offices didn't look great. Case didn't care about that. All of the money we make has to go into recordings and paying staff. Who gives a damn whether we've got a fancy coffee machine? And nobody else did, actually, for that matter. In the office that I started in Amsterdam, the Barsjes there, the coffee machine consisted of a sort of a container with a filter on top, and people would just like chuck a bit of filter coffee, and then you pour hot water over it, and you do that for the entire morning. I mean, it's disgusting. That was the coffee machine. And because there was such a mess left in the kitchen, it was completely male dominated. It was so unwoke you wouldn't believe it. I think there was one woman in the office, outnumbered by 20 blokes. So you can imagine what the kitchen looked like, and these were metalheads as well. Young metalheads. It looked like shite. So Case at some point just took the container with the coffee filter on top and slammed it in the dustbin. Because he was so sick and tired of it. So we had no coffee machine for the longest time until someone dared to buy something that produced some kind of coffee. So the money never went into flash surroundings, fancy cars, nice parties, or even big bonuses. It just all went into making the label bigger and better.
I have a theory about this, and this may be way before your time or before your interactions with Case, and I make this point on that 80 to 86 video. I keep calling it the 80 to 86 video and not the documentary because I know that it's getting redone. So I want it to be a separate entity. But in the disco era, as we call it, 77 to 80, Polygram creeps. Polygram is like has a scope creep. Casablanca Records is famous for limos and cocaine. That and this is when Case is working in the major infrastructure, like in the major label world. I think, and again, I could be full of shit. It's that excess and that bloat on the profit and loss sheet which informed a lot of this ethic.
Yeah.
It's because he saw it come crashing down. He saw the bubble burst after disco and went, well, you know what? You shouldn't have paid out your ass for limos and yachts and shit, and then maybe you'd still be a viable business proposition.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and don't forget, it was his own money. I mean, it was the remortgaging of his house. It was his saving. He put everything into this label, so his money was at risk. And so he had to be prudent. He had to be careful because if it didn't work, he'd have no house. He'd have no livelihood because he wasn't going to be able to go back into the major label system in any hurry because that was kind of a closed door. And he didn't want to go back, so it had to succeed. And it can only succeed if you're balancing the successes with the investment, and the success has to slightly outweigh the investment until we got the hockey stick. The KSOD was certainly the hockey stick, and until then it was slow incremental growth. But he just stuck with it. Mm-hmm. By necessity, he had to be prudent. He couldn't fail.
Yeah, it's interesting when to speak to that in a way. We're in 93 through 95. It is death metal, it is metal, it is thrash metal, it's all these things. Then we see a diversification. And you mentioned the Buddhist acquisition. Now, we've spoken about that before, as in between me and you personally.
Yeah.
But just to contextualize it and take a step back, Case was sometimes, or Roadrunner as an entity was sometimes in the business of acquiring some of the weird and wonderful. Buddhist wasn't weird and wonderful. Buddhist was fairly poppy, right? It was fairly
pop label, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Pop and
What else?
hardcore dance.
Yeah.
Pop, yeah. The kind of
What?
boom, boom, boom type of.
Yeah, Eurotrance
Yeah,
and whatnot.
yeah.
What else did Roadrunner acquire, which might surprise me? I know Third Mind.
Acquire. We didn't. Well, I mean, do you know we did a Sir Cliff Richard record?
Didn't know that.
Ah, this was probably
What the fuck?
around the time we did the Moloko, the Echo license.
Right. Okay.
Late 90s. Yeah, it must have been 90, 98, 99. Around about that time, we had Sir Cliff Richard's Christmas single, which shipped something like 120,000 singles in Germany, of which maybe 70,000 came back. But forget about that. So that
There's a Sinead O'Connor one as well, wasn't there, in 2003?
Yeah, I think this might be when Wally, Charlie Prick was working for us, and Wally had not rejoined us yet. So we had this period when you've come across the name Charlie Prick.
Nope. Nope. Get ready for some clacking where I'm typing it in.
Charlie Prick. So Charlie was a pop guy. He'd managed Boney M and Telly Savalas and Backstreet Boys in Germany, part of the Jacksons family. So he was some big league management and had been involved in the German label system. So look, shortly after Buddhist, we had a hit with a record called "I Want to Be a Hippie," which saw something ridiculous like 1 million singles all over Europe. Reached number 6 in the UK charts, number 1 in Holland. I think it was even number 1 in Germany. I Want to Be a Hippie was one of these happy hardcore tunes. So because we had this sniff of chart success in Germany, that smelled like more. And Charlie Prick was an expert in how to get chart success in Germany. So we brought him in.
Wow.
And he was living in Holland at the time. He came to work for us. Charlie was an A&R guy as well. He was jack of all trades, management, A&R. And he was the guy behind bringing in pop act to Roadrunner, Moloko being one of them, the Echo label. Cliff Richard was part of that. We did a Human League album. We had John Oates album at some point. So we went really into the sort of pop direction with differing degrees of success. But back to your question, acquisitions, surprising acquisitions. Yeah, a classical music label called Emergo Classics. So case.
Not no link to Emergo, Roadrunner Emergo.
No, that was an American label, right? Roadrunner Emergo.
I think there's a British one as well.
No, there's no link to that. No, it was Emergo Classics. Case gets into classical music, and we acquired a few classical music catalogs that didn't. I mean, Case is a lover of opera and classical music, but there's not much money to be had in classical music, and classical music recordings are kind of expensive, and you can't get 5-album deals with orchestras. So that was short-lived, but that was a surprising sort of like a sidestep on a tangent.
Interesting. You kind of nailed it with the Cliff Richard reference, though. And I think you wanted the Office of the Queen as well by referring to him by his proper title.
Very good.
Yeah. It's an interesting period as well when you see this expansion. I always ask this, and I know what the answer is. It's why the move from metal? Because we knew at this point this was the brand, and we knew this was the strength of Roadrunner. Yet, when we look to say 95 through to about maybe like the Slipknot era, that you have your flagship acts, even Sepultura post Max Cavalera, Life of Agony is still putting out records, as a Fear Factory. The big flagships are still going, but the things that we don't hear about are things like Screaming Mother, Garage Fuzz, Bennett, Kong. There's loads which obviously no one's ever heard of, because this was Roadrunner flexing.
Yeah, UK A&R, yeah.
Yeah, so why was this just diversification to try and get more traction and more revenue elsewhere, or was this part of the design to be effectively a one-size-fits-all outfit?
It was a bit of both. I mean, we wanted, I think, Case, after having had success with, the Sepulturas and Typos and commercial success with bands like Machine Head and Dog Eat Dog, we were in the charts, we're on the radio with a band like Dog Eat Dog. That smelled like more as well. And to move from a Dog Eat Dog to a Bennett, which is really just kind of like an alternative pop act in the UK, was not as large a step as it may have appeared. We're not going from extreme metal to pop. There's kind of like a trajectory there to get there. And maybe the Dog Eat Dog thing was kind of like the dovetail to
perhaps,
yeah. But also, we were bringing in A&R guys like Miles Leonard, who were not necessarily from a rock background. So I just think Case felt if you've got to have a broader base than only focus on metal, because metal, however popular it may have stayed for a long time, there were changes starting to emerge. Was it going to be popular forever? Maybe not. So you've got to spread your wings somewhat and diversify in your kind of like in your product range.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, in the midst of this, you're gonna have to tell me about Toy Shop.
Toy Shop was a Brazilian act. Their pop single that Case loved. This was one of his. I'm going to write the troops now, because he loved that single so much. He just said that we have to make this, has to be a hit. I want this.
The single. Okay, so hang on. I think the artist is Toy Shop.
Yeah.
I think the record is called Party Up, and I think the single is called Follow Me. There is so little reference to this in the zeitgeist of, say, collectors markets and things like that. I'm just going to check Discogs to see if there's anything of substance. Party Up, 5 versions on Roadrunner Records, 1997. Released US, Poland, Japan, and the Czech Republic. Yeah, and that's it. That's all you see. There's no images of like the liner notes or anything. It's just the cover.
Yeah, I don't remember the track being called that, and I don't remember how the band was signed. Probably out of the Brazilian office, because we had 8 people working for us in Brazil at some point, an office in Sao Paulo, and we had a radio promoter working in Rio de Janeiro. I mean, that was just one of the best trips ever, going down there. No one had an office or 2 offices in Brazil, and I think those guys, every office we had were given a kind of A&R responsibility, go and sign acts from that territory, and they came up with Toy Shop, I believe. But anyway, here's Case saying, "I demand that this is world domination. I believe in this. Make it happen." And it didn't really happen anywhere outside Italy, where we had this runaway success. We were top 20. We had just acquired the arcade company, so we'd gone from being, in a manner of speaking, little Roadrunner to this big, one of the biggest independents around at the time. We're now rock and pop because of the arcade acquisition. And the guy in Italy, Paolo D'Alessandro, gave Case his hit record with Toy Shop, and that's made Case's ears perk up, because we didn't even know Paolo at the time, and here's Case saying, well, if he can make a hit out of Toy Shop, bring him in. He's obviously got talents. And Paolo joined our Roadrunner international operation in Amsterdam, literally months later, months after the toy shop success. And not just he didn't just achieve chart success, but he got toy shop in a Bade Das. I don't know if that's a brand that you're familiar with. It's kind of like a shower gel product. He got it in a Bade Das commercial. So not only had we charted it, but it was on a major commercial in Italy as the kind of like the underground, the underscore to that commercial.
It's just such a weird, considering like the record market, because a lot of like my research is based around like, I've said it a few times before. When I was first looking at Roadrunner, I was like, let's get everything. Let's get everything from the very start all the way to 2012. And let's only find the direct signings, because while the licensing stuff is interesting and there is a big angle to it, I discovered, and I probably should have given it more attention. The value of Roadrunner as a brand is in its direct signings and those flagship acts. So let's see exactly what they were up to. And you just see a load of oddities like this where there's, and again, when you're looking at the flagship acts, there's such well recorded instances from collectors when certain things are misprinted. For example, I think it might have been KRCD where there was like 40,000 records that you had to destroy because the liner notes spelt out something derogatory towards Epic, or something like that. I love those little stories, and the collector's market's full of them, but there's just some where there's fucking nothing. And Toy Shop was one of them. And I was like, what the hell is this?
It was just a bubble for, it seemed like 2 months where nobody really, Case is running the troops. He, 9 times out of 10, everybody got behind him. But when it came to Toy Shop, people were like, okay, this is way too outside of our comfort zone. We just don't get it. But Paolo did.
Yeah.
Funny you say that about destroying, booklets. I think we had to destroy 500,000 Slipknot booklets at some point because of a spelling mistake on the liner notes. 500,000.
Oh no!
I think it said slip komt rather than and komt in Dutch is the word for ass. So there was like a double irony there. That stuff happened more often than you'd want it to. Chuck stuff in the bin.
Are there any other outlier stories, such as Toy Shop, especially in this period, sort of 95 to 2000, where there's just some weird oddity which everyone gets behind?
Well, the whole arcade acquisition takeover was a totally weird oddity because we were, as a company, quite happily going on, being successful with rock acts, and so we had some diversification in some of the territories like the UK, like you just mentioned, Bennett and a few other bands that we were amazingly unsuccessful with. And then along comes arcade. Case goes, I want this company. Yeah, it's up for sale. I want it because it's a perfect match for us. We're established in all these strongholds, but we're not in Scandinavia. We're not in Italy. We're not in Spain. Arcade is. They do music that we don't do, or we don't do well with. Let's make this happen.
And Arcade at this point is mostly a pop compilation outfit.
Yeah, and they've had big successes in the Netherlands and some local successes in countries like Sweden with Nutrition McNeil was a huge pop act in Sweden. They've had successes in Germany with all sorts of pop acts. So, furthering on from the kind of like the Buddhist period, 94, 95, with some pop hits. It's only 5 years later that the arcade takeover happens. And it kind of like falls into place because it's in the same line of thought of like diversification, consolidation. Case always felt that if you're going to make any kind of impact or impression on the majors, you've got to consolidate the independent strength, and that's what he believed we would do with the arcade takeover. It felt very weird for a lot of the DNA of the company. The Americans totally did not get it because they didn't get the music. The personalities didn't really fit. He was an arcade guy. He was a Roadrunner guy. That was it was a weird anomaly. We as Roadrunner moved into the arcade offices in Holland. Our offices weren't big enough to accommodate arcade. There were 88 people working in arcade at the time. There were 21 Roadrunner people. So it's almost like a reverse takeover. We moved into their office, and we were the purchasing company. It was really, really strange.
Headcount reduction?
Massively, yeah. The bloodbath. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. No,
Shit.
wasn't a good time. And also, shortly after the acquisition, mainly the arcade side was just bleeding losses. It was, I mean, it was an unmitigated disaster. We had to close offices down. We had to, one or two of them were about to go belly up, and we managed to find buyers for those companies up in Nordic, in Scandinavia. Italy, we closed down, but brought Paolo into the Dutch office. Spain, we continued with for quite some time with a good degree of success. They were doing Spanish pop and Spanish music, which is kind of a weird fit with Roadrunner as well. And we were trying to get the Roadrunner acts to do well through the Spanish company or the Scandinavian company, but those fits weren't, in reverse, were not always the best. Before the arcade takeover, we might in Scandinavia be with a strong metal distributor, but because you want to get the synergies, you stop with the distributor and you bring it into the arcade fold. But those guys didn't get rock, just like we didn't get pop. So it was a weird fit. And ultimately, I guess, in retrospect, maybe we shouldn't have done it.
The case is no stranger to compilations. Roadrunner's chucking out compilations every second it can, but through promo CDs and things like that. So it kind of stands to reason that he'd think the Venn diagram crossed in a way, from at least an administrative point of view.
Yeah, the difference being Arcade was doing TV compilations, so heavily TV marketing them, and we weren't, we were not in that game. So we did a lot of compilations, but it was all, fairly low key stuff compared to Arcade days.
So, what year is the Arcade acquisition?
1999, 24th of December.
Is this driven by the Edel stuff? This is driven by it, isn't it? This is like a background. I'm trying to piece together the background context of the Edel stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know how closely the handshake is between Edel, Roadrunner, and then Arcade being a child of that. Well, not necessarily a child, more of an adopted child of that.
Yeah, true. So we had an Edel joint venture prior to the Arcade takeover in the Benelux. I think we were called Roadrunner, Edel Roadrunner Benelux at some point. This is around 96, 97.
Okay.
For the Dutch. So we had a joint office in Holland. Edel was already expanding massively. This is before their public offering, before they went to the stock exchange.
Let's take a step back and go, well, who are Edel in the industry at the time, and why did Case want to do a joint venture with them?
I don't know how the meeting of minds transpired, but it was Case and Michael Heinches. I mean, they were great. They were kindred spirits. Michael was doing really well in Germany, and he must have noticed our success because we'd had this #1 in Germany and other chart successes in Germany, and he was running an independent label as well. He was a great promotion guy, and his label was picking up a lot of steam. Those guys must have just come together at some point and gone, hey, let's work together, and why don't we start in the Benelux, where Case wasn't maybe getting the type of success he demanded from that territory. Edel had pop success, we had rock success. He thought that might be a good marriage. So we had this joint company for 2 or 3 years in the Benelux. And then fast forward into the Arcade takeover. Case had just sold his publishing company, Roadster, to BMG. But the Arcade.
How does Roadster differ from All Blacks, by the way?
Publishing. So song publishing. All Blacks is master rights. So all
Got
recordings
it.
and Roadster.
That's why we see All Blacks on Spotify and we don't see Roadster on Spotify.
Correct. Yes, exactly right. So fast forward, that Roadster sale had just happened in '99. There's a bunch of money sitting in a bank account. Case never liked money sitting on a bank account. He always wanted to reinvest it. The Arcade proposition came along, and we went for it. It could only happen if we had outside investment, because the Roadster money, whatever else we had, bank loans were not going to be able to finance that rather large takeover. So in comes Adel again. Michael Heinches said, "I will, I'll take a share of the company after the fact, and in the meantime, I will help you finance whatever you need to make the deal happen." So we were simultaneously negotiating with Adel while negotiating with the vendors of Arcade. So the whole thing had to sort of come together at the same time. This is all at the end of '99. We knew we were going to be able to get the money from Adel to finance the deal. The deal with Arcade came together. The company got bought.
It's worth mentioning at a time that Roadrunner is still not, it's not like a massive money-making entity. It's successful, but it's not got capital to buy other companies outright.
No,
exactly.
I mean, you don't. No, yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, you'd want to go to usually when you're doing a takeover, as you know, working in the banking world, you go to a bank and say, "Look, this is what we want to do. Will you lend us? This is our profit. How much will you lend us to be able to do this, finance this takeover?" And banks tend to help you with that. And unless you're a record company, unless you're an independent record company, then they go, "Sorry, we don't get this business model. We're not doing it." So the banks would only go so far and nowhere far enough. So we needed a strategic investor in the form of an Adel, because the majors we weren't even sat at the table with the majors at the time. The most powerful cash-rich independent at the time was Adel, and that was the go-to place for Case, because he was just as into doing that deal as Case was.
Yeah. So carry on. I interrupted to get context.
So we're now in January 2000, and the deal's been done. Shortly afterwards, we start encountering all sorts of problems. I mean, in a takeover, there's this part called reps and warranties, where the company says, "We're doing okay. We've got no lawsuits. We've got no tax burdens. We've got no royalty problems." The Arcade takeover, I think the disclosures were about 10 pages long. There were a lot of problems in the company, a lot of lawsuits, a lot of former employees suing the company, artists trying to get out of their deals. There were,
at least they're honest.
Yeah, well, it had to be. But there were liens on assets. It was actually a bloody mess. But here is his Case going, "I don't give a damn. I want this company. We'll work it out. I've got the right team in place. We'll solve all these problems down the road." But I mean, they bore heavily on our time and our capital, because you don't just settle a bunch. You don't just settle 20 lawsuits without some sort of damage to the bottom line. So, and at the same time, we were bleeding losses in some of the Arcade territories. So things weren't all that great in the year 2000. This continued for quite a long period. This kind of like malaise we were in, until we get, and then we get to this point where Adel was supposed to invest in our company. They'd sort of like forward us some money in a kind of like a bridge loan type of capacity, and that was all supposed to be converted into Michael actually investing in Roadrunner. That investment never happened because Adel hit the rocks at some point as well. You know, they were one of the biggest, they were the biggest independent for a time, probably late 90s, early 2000. I think Adel had a market capitalization of 1 billion Deutschmarks. They were buying companies all over the place, or financing the purchases of companies in America, all over the place, heavily marketing their acts, doing loads of stuff on TV, the really expensive stuff. But they had loads of money, and it ran out, and they were up shit's creek without a paddle at some point. And Michael had to turn to Case and say, "I can't do that investment in the company, and I need my money back, and I need it in 30 days." And there was there was no option. It was make or break at that point.
Yeah.
We're now early 2001.
How much did he owe? Just to get an idea of the gravity of this money he needs to give back. Is there a figure, or is there an analogy you can throw at me?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably it's 20 years ago now. So without about 20 million euros we had to pay back in old money. So whatever that's worth in today's money, maybe 30 million euros we had to come up with.
And if Case just did it outright, Roadrunner's over.
It was over. Yeah, there was a point where we were getting. I had a fax machine next to my desk, and there were labels just faxing all the time, like, "Where's my money? Well, where's the advance?" And we weren't paying anyone. I remember going into Case saying, "I've had 15 faxes from this guy, Case. We've got to pay him." And Case said, "Look, what would you rather have? Your salary at the end of the month, or pay this guy?" And I left the room again. So we were just holding people off. And that's when he was so focused, so single-mindedly in survival mode. And he rallies the troops again. It was a small team in Amsterdam of the CFO, Ian, Wim was involved, the current CFO, myself, one or two external advisors. And he said, "You guys, I don't know how you're going to do it, but get me 10, 15 million gills at the time, whatever, call it euros, by the end of the month." And we're now on the first day of that month. I mean, that was just an unbelievable challenge and almost an unattainable challenge. But we did it. Yeah, selling catalogs, settling lawsuits that would free up some money, getting advances in from distributors, pulling out all the stops, whatever we could do to generate income, we did, just to be able to pay some of the bills. The bank was also, we had a bank credit at the time. The bank was also knocking at the door saying, "This is the last month we're going to pay the salaries, unless the credit balance is down." So we were probably for a month or two, just around the clock. I don't think we ever went home. There was a point where we were just sleeping in the office. Pizzas were being delivered at 10 o'clock on Friday night. It's a good thing most of us were either not married or without too many drag coefficients at the time, because our partners, if we had a partner, were just seeing nothing of us. We had to save this company. We almost lost our shirts. We had to. This money had to go back to Adel. We had to generate income. But there had to be another rabbit out the hat, because it wasn't enough to generate that money and pay a little bit of the bank and pay Adel a bit of their money back. It all had to go back. And then you fast forward to the IDJ deal. That was the day.
Before we come to that, what's the culture in this month? Are you a secret enclave of people who know what's going on, or are all the offices like something's happening over in Amsterdam, boys?
I'm sure that was happening. I'm sure people all over the world were saying, "Why can't we pay anyone?" But it was 3-4 people in the Amsterdam office who were really in the know, and the rest were guessing. And we weren't. We were keeping tight-lipped about how bad it was. I think even now, if you ask people, do you have any idea how close Roadrunner came to its own demise? They go, "Really? I had no idea." It was touch and go for a while.
Yeah, which leads us straight into IDJ.
Yeah, and that's the amazing flip side to this, because underlying all of this, there was an unbelievable value in the company of assets, of recordings, of potential successes in the future. So here's a company that's on its knees that is worth so much still, and I suppose that happens a lot in companies that fold, that might not have had to have folded. So our Deus was IDJ in the form of Lear Cohen, Case and Lear, kind of like did that deal where Case sells half of his company, and the valuation of the company at that time was well above what we had to pay Hunches and others. So we were saved. However, Case had lost half his shares.
Was it 50%, or was it smack on 50? Wow.
It was 50%, which is an interesting one, because normally majors want 50 percent and they share, so they've got the majority or more.
Yeah.
It was 50-50, and Case had the running of the company, and that is the confidence that Leo had in Case. Like, we might have 50% of the company, but we shouldn't touch anything. Case is in charge. He's got to have his team and be able to run his company as he sees fit. Have financial control. Be pulling the strings as he always did. We shouldn't touch that. This is a success story that we shouldn't, in any way, shape, or form, try to limit.
Wow. So imagine being someone on one of the satellite offices who's just like, we're not getting paid. Something's really weird is happening. And then they walk in one day and it's Case and Leo Cohen shaking hands and thinking, oh shit, what the fuck's been going on?
Funny.
Let's leave it there. Sorry, Ashley, go on.
No, I was going to say, it could have, Leo was the one that wanted the deal the most, and that's why I went to NJ in the end. But that wasn't the only label looking at Roadrunner at the time, because when we put the feelers out to every major, and every major came and took a look, they did their due diligence. There was a time when in the Dutch office in where we were at the time, in a place called Naarden, where there was so many suits walking around the office that half the time we didn't know whether they were our advisors or whether it was a team of lawyers coming in doing due diligence for Sony, or was it BMG this time, or was it Universal? They all came and did. They all came and looked, and I think we got we got offers from everybody. But the one that Case felt best about was IDJ, because they were going to leave him to do it his way.
They wanted Slipknot and Nickelback, and they knew they had to leave Roadrunner to do everything else.
Yeah.
That's
exactly right, and it's funny because I remember reading some of the due diligence reports from these majors, and everybody was focused on Slipknot at the time, because we'd already had success with Slipknot, and it looked like that success was going to continue. One of the labels, and it might have been IDJ, I don't even know, but one of the labels said, "Now hang on, this is band Nickelback. That band is going to be absolutely huge." And maybe with the exception of Case, everyone went, "Really? Okay." And they were right. I don't know if they were the acquiring company in the end, but that was certainly the focus. Yeah, if you have Slipknot and you have Nickelback, then you're going to be fine. And there's all this other stuff, in the tailwind of these big acts that coming down the pipeline as well.
What a strange 3 years between Nickelback's The State coming out in 98 through to the acquisition. Because then Slipknot make waves around the same time, then 99 comes around. Yeah, it's just that 3 year period is just a very, very intensive give and take on like a massive scale, isn't it? It's crazy.
So there's a view that if we hadn't done the arcade acquisition, I pretty much subscribe to this view actually. If we hadn't done the arcade acquisition, we'd sold Roadster. We had, we were plenty of capital in the company. Take away the acquisition, we wouldn't have to have borrowed any money from the Adel Group or banks or whatever else. Those successes wouldn't have to have been shared with anyone. Case would have had 100% of his shares. We would presumably have attracted more acts of that ilk, bigger rock acts, and the thing could have just been absolutely ginormous. But it was kind of dragged down for a period by the arcade acquisition. However, having said that, in the end, we had our 7 big years, sort of from 2002, 2003, right up until the sale of the company the first tranche sold to Warner's. I mean, the Nickelback, call it the Nickelback years, they were so incredibly profitable. And it wasn't just Nickelback. There were several acts that were doing fantastically at the time. The company was going through, we had years that was $20 million profit per year, bottom line profit per year. It was insane, that period.
Pre-recession as well.
Sorry?
Pre-recession, pre-digital era.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's leave it there then, because I'm trying to unpack a bit more of the 2000s, because I've got a skew perspective, what with having lived it. So I want to make sure it's all above board. But thank you very much. I know it's something like